So I'm really delighted to welcome everybody here this morning to our first ever virtual summit. It is extraordinary. We're all a little bit crossing our fingers and toes to hope that the Zoom technology holds up. So thank you so much for bearing with us, and we are super excited. We would, as Sinead says, have preferred to welcome you to our usual venue in Croke Park, but we're really grateful to have you in our company, regardless of the venue, physical or cloud. There's been an overwhelming interest in today's event with over, I think it's 430 people now online, and I know there's a Zoom limit of 500. So for those who need the overflow as they come on late, as we Irish people tend to do, they will also have the ability to look at us as live streaming, because we did have over 700 people registered to attend this event. So I think it's a sign that coming together is something that we all really prize at this time, more so than ever. Sinead mentioned the hashtag Charity Summit. So I will be referring to a couple of videos later on, and at that stage I will mention the fact that our Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, has sent us a word, a special message today. But we have a packed schedule with 2 hours with what is, in effect, it's chapter 1 of our virtual summit series. So how to change a one-day conference in Croke Park and an evening reception into online. You do it in snippets and you do it in chapters, and we've decided to stream it out over and stretch it out over a month. So in today's session, after a few short remarks from me and 2 special videos, we'll be hosting this panel discussion exploring the big challenges and opportunities facing both organisations individually and the sector as a whole, as we strive to continue our work and supporting and connecting people and communities. So I'm really looking forward to hearing the discussion. Brilliant panel of contributors, and I'd like to thank them in advance. Suzanne Connolly, the CEO of Barnardo's, Alison Harnett, the Policy Director with the National Federation of Voluntary Bodies, Anna Shakespeare, CEO at Pobble, and Tracy Monson, Director of Services with the Daughters of Charity. And then following that, we're going to have special remarks from Paula Sullivan, who's the Chairperson of the Wheel and CEO of Clancredo, the Social Investment Fund. And at that point, the second main session of today will commence, and that involves a conversation between myself and Kevin McCarthy, who's the Secretary General of the Department of Rural and Community Development. And we will conclude proceedings at 11:30 a.m. as scheduled. You will have noticed that we got started at 9:30. So that's the scheduling out of the way. And before we get going, I would like to say a few remarks about the current situation, because it's extraordinary, a much overused word, but all of us here have been professionally and personally been through what is probably the most challenging period in our lifetime for our society. Our thoughts this morning must be with the 1,600 people in Ireland who've lost their lives, and globally, the almost 400,000 people globally who've lost their lives. Our thoughts have to be with and are with their many bereaved loved ones, friends and communities coping with their sudden loss. I'm sure that there are very many in this meeting who are amongst that number. At the same time, we must also acknowledge the remarkable priority that our people and country have placed on minimising the impact of the disease, and the extraordinary effort that's been shown to support people living with the impact of the social distancing regime that's proven so successful in stopping the infection in its tracks. There's been an extraordinary collective effort to really put people and community first in this crisis. And our charities and community and voluntary organisations and social enterprises have played an immense role, as you well know, alongside and in partnership with our statutory health and social services partners in achieving this end. So before we proceed, and to really set the tone of this gathering of massive gathering of community and voluntary and charity sector activists, can we first remind ourselves of the amazing work that we all know that we do, but sometimes isn't it great to see someone else compile it for us? So I'm going to pass over to my colleague Sarah Monaghan, who's our campaigns manager, and she's going to just tell you a little bit about this video and then play it. So over to you, Sarah, as they say.
Hello, good morning everyone. I hope you are very, very well. My name is Sarah Monaghan and I'm campaigns manager for The Wheel. So as Deirdre touched on, it has been my absolute pleasure over the last 10 weeks to work very closely with our members on our community response IRL campaign. The intention of this campaign was to collate and, more importantly, elevate all of the work that's happening all over the country, the work that sprung into action more or less overnight in response to the COVID-19 crisis. So we prepared today a short video for you all that is merely a snapshot of that work, obviously to encapture the full picture, to include it all. We'd be here for the next week, and while that'd be pleasant and a week well spent, we know that your time supporting people and vulnerable communities is extremely precious. So we hope that you find this short video, which we're about to hit play on, as inspiring and beautiful and impressive as all of us at the wheel do. To say that we are in awe of your incredible work, your feat of reorganizing, restructuring and responding over the last number of weeks, and of course far beyond that, is an understatement. The fact that you've done so with such kindness and such compassion at all times is so beautiful. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen now for you all. Now, as just to get the technical glitches out of the way for everyone else, Deirdre has informed me that there's no sound, so just give me one moment and we will do that again.
Hello again. I found myself quite emotional actually watching that, as I'm sure many of you did also. So we recognize these images because they're so familiar to us. It's not news for us, you who are already so deeply embedded in the public benefit work that our organizations do. It's not news for you to know that people are deeply committed and motivated to help and support others. It's very important also to say that today's summit is in part intended to celebrate the contribution that the sector has made to bringing out the best in us all. It's important that we in the sector, and indeed the state, recognise the contribution that organised civil society and you, the members of the wheel, and indeed the wider community and voluntary sector at large have made to that. So thank you. The pandemic has of course seriously impacted the work of many organisations here today. The reorganisation of services to ensure continued remote supports, devising and implementing new services almost overnight, working virtually making face-to-face supports and services safe, securing PPE, and a million other things. All of this has been accomplished while at the same time, many organisations have experienced a dramatic decline in their own income through cancelled or postponed fundraising drives and the cancellation of activities that might generate an earned income. These and many other matters will be the subject, no doubt, of the conversation to come. And while not wishing to preempt that conversation, it's worth making a few points. Never in my experience of 21 years here in the Wheel have I seen such a high degree of collaborative work amongst community and voluntary organisations and their representative bodies as I have seen in the last 3 months. I have been so impressed by the pulling together that's been in evidence within the sector and between the sector and the state, departments and agencies, local and national, that we collaborate. We in the Wheel are proud to have been part of that collaboration through our work on the community response frontline, indeed with our partners in that Irish Rural Link. But this community call has truly been a unique partnership between the state, the local authorities and the community and voluntary sector, as indeed the radio ads have been telling us for weeks. The Stability Fund and the Innovate Together Fund, announced a few weeks back by the government, and was the result of an extraordinary collaborative effort on the part of many charities, community and voluntary representative bodies, working closely with the Department of Rural and Community Development and Minister Ring and Canny. And I'd like to thank those partners. I hesitate to name any of the 13, but I particularly want to thank Liz and Charities Institute and Diarmuid and Carmichael and Nina in Volunteer Ireland and Suzanne in Docus, and I'm going to get into trouble because I am going to stop there. But I also want to put on record at this point the sector's appreciation of the efforts of all involved in delivering this lifeline for many organisations. The scheme, in Minister Ring's words when he announced it, was designed to assist organisations to weather the crisis and to allow them to maintain their valuable services. No, it's in the kitchen. It's certainly not a panacea for the further challenges ahead, and had many restrictions and problems for some organisations, but it absolutely brings crucial breathing space for many. We look forward to building on today's discussions in future engagements with the department and the political parties, now negotiating the next government to ensure that the sector's key issues are central to the thinking of the next government in the period ahead. Major challenges lie ahead for our sector, for the work we do, for the people and communities we serve. For example, a survey by the Charities Regulator just this month revealed that over 2/3 of charities said services were already restricted, and 54% fear they may be unable to continue for more than another 6 months. This is very serious. Many more challenges than these will no doubt be identified in this summit session to come. So please rest assured that we in the Wheel will be working to represent your interests to ensure that the learnings from how we as a society have responded to the crisis and the innovations and responsiveness displayed by charities, community and voluntary organisations and social enterprises, and their responsiveness in that effort are kept to the fore of the change agenda in Ireland in the period ahead. So, as we get started, I would like to play for you a message from our Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar. As many of you will be aware from last year, he was an important part of our 20th anniversary celebrations in Croke Park, and he is very welcome once again, albeit virtually, to acknowledge the work done by our members and the sector. So at this point, I'm going to hand over again to my colleague Sarah, who will play the video, the short video of Taoiseach.
Thank you for the invitation to join you today. A lot has changed in our country and the world since I spoke to you at last year's summit. Through all the pain, grief and tragedy, COVID-19 has reminded us of the value of our charities and volunteers and the determination and optimism of our citizens. Volunteering, community action and social enterprise help to make our country what it is. And now, more than ever, we need your sector to the fore. Whether it's listening to someone's problems on a helpline or providing Meals on Wheels through the community centre, you are at the heart of our communities. Thank you for reaching the most marginalised and the most alone in our society, and for helping those who need help the most. I know this emergency has had a devastating impact on your fundraising and income. That's why we've made 35 million available to ensure your organisations can keep the lights on and keep providing the services people depend on. We've received over 1,000 applications and I hope this fund can help you navigate your way through the current crisis. On top of that, the Innovate Together Fund, worth $5 million, has been put in place to help your organisations adapt and find new ways of working as we prepare for the future and try to adjust to a new normal. Other supports include the wage subsidy scheme to help with staff costs and avoid redundancies. So thank you for the massive contribution you're making to our country. In good times and in bad, your spirit of public service and sense of community makes us believe in a better future. Keep up the good work, and thank you again.
I'd like to thank the Taoiseach for ensuring he did not miss out on addressing you at our summit, albeit virtually. And I think his words sum up, I guess, in a very brief way, what I have also been saying and what I think we need to say to each other, which is thank you for the public-spirited, civic-mindedness, compassion, solidarity, caring, generous, kind work that we have all been doing, you have all been doing over the past 3 months, and for years and decades before that as well, I might add. So I think both videos tee us up for the discussions to come, and I'd now like to pass over to my colleague Ivan Cooper, Director of Public Policy, to get our panel discussion going. And before I hand over, a couple of quick reminders for those who arrived after Sinead's housekeeping thing this morning. So for people who are attending as participants and guests, please keep your microphones muted and your cameras switched off. All technical queries should be directed through the chat function, and any questions for the panel should be emailed to Lily at lily@wheel.ie. And don't forget the hashtag Charity Summit and the live stream on YouTube. So at this point, I'm now going to hand over to Ivan and switch my video and camera off. And I hope you enjoy the next hour and a half. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Deirdre. Welcome everybody to our virtual summit and our meaty middle section of this morning's proceedings. Before I introduce our panelists, I'd just like to say a few words just to tee up the session, so to speak. We've been through a period of extraordinary change and challenge for the sector, as I'm sure is clear to everybody here today and from the remarks already made. Demand for supports and services and advocacy is up very significantly at a time when earned and fundraised income has collapsed for many in community and voluntary organisations, charities and social enterprises. It's estimated that fundraised and earned income will be down by between 400 and 500 million euro this year if the current situation prevails. Yet the CV sector has been at the very core of Ireland's positive response to the COVID-19 challenge, reconfiguring services to conform with social distancing and rising to the challenge of remote working. The sector's representative bodies have worked hard together with government to ensure high levels of awareness of the acute pressure facing many charities. And we are all greatly welcomed, I should say, the 40 million euro stability package that Deirdre's referred to and the wage subsidy scheme, which have greatly helped many organisations. Yet a great deal remains to be done to ensure the CV sector can survive and indeed thrive in the period ahead. And responding will pose challenges for both the sector and the state. During the crisis, we deprioritised the needs of the economy for the benefit of our society, and made many great sacrifices in the doing of this. As national discussion now turns in earnest to setting priorities for recovery, it is timely for the sector to consider and develop our own understanding of both the challenges and opportunities that present. For there are many opportunities too that can be discerned and learned from the experience of recent months. We have been engaged in thinking about the medium to long-term impact of the sector, and we produced in recent weeks, following many discussions, a document to inform our conference this morning, which hopefully some of you, if not many or all of you, have had a chance to read. It was included in the emails confirming registrations. Building on that document, we have our panel discussion this morning, designed to further explore and widen out consideration of the challenges and opportunities and priorities for the sector. And we're really delighted now to welcome Anna Shakespeare, CEO of Pobble, Alison Harnett, the Interim Manager of the National Federation of Voluntary Service Providers, Suzanne Connolly, the CEO of Bernardo's, and Tracy Monson, the Director of Services of the Daughters of Charity Child and Family Services. And if I could just ask our contributors now that I've just named there to start their videos and unmute themselves. And I see Alison has done that. Welcome, Alison. Welcome, Tracy. Welcome, Suzanne. And I just want to make sure that Anna is there too. And welcome, Anna. Great to see you all. So thank you to the four of you for joining us this morning at this first virtual summit. And our approach this morning is going to be to consider this question of the challenges and the opportunities presenting for both the sector and for community and voluntary organizations individually. Clearly, there's a great deal of change coming. Much of it we've attempted to indicate in the discussion paper. And what we're really looking forward to now is hearing the thoughts of and the perceptions of each of our contributors based on personal experiences of what they think and what we think the challenges and opportunities that are presenting are going to be. So the four contributors and myself had a discussion about the best way to go about doing this to extract the maximum learning opportunity for all of us. And we've agreed that a good way to approach it would be to look at the challenges facing the sector as a whole to begin with, then take a look at the opportunities for the sector as a whole that are associated with those challenges, and then move down to the more, if you want to call it, that's the macro level, and then move down to the micro level by looking at the challenges that present to individual organizations and the opportunities that present to individual organizations. And the way we're going to go about approaching it is Anna will start, followed up by Alison, who'll look at the opportunities for the sector. So Anna will jump in with the challenges for the sector, followed up by Alison looking at the opportunities for the sector. Then Suzanne will take a look at the challenges facing individual organizations, and Tracy will round it out by looking at the opportunities for the community and voluntary, for individual organizations. Once again, if I can just take this opportunity to remind everybody else who's not a panelist or an interpreter just to mute their microphones. Is that okay? Just so we have minimal disturbance. We have over 468 people in the room now, so the slightest amount of background noise will interfere in all of level of engagement and learning. Okay, so Anna, if I can ask you to take center stage right now, and then when we've finished with the contributions, we'll move to discussions. And just to note again, Anna, before you start, for the benefit of everybody else, please turn off your videos, everybody else, and mute yourselves. And if you have any questions that you'd like to put to the panel, email them to lily@wheel.ie. That's lily@wheel.ie, LILY@wheel.ie. So, okay, without further ado, Anna, over to you. And perhaps for the benefit, given we have so many people in the room, maybe you could just say a little bit about Pobble and what Pobble does, and then move into kind of sharing your thinking with us about what you think the big challenges for the sector are in the period ahead. Thank you, Anna.
Sure, Ivan. Good morning, and good morning, everybody. And thank you, Deirdre and the Wheel, for the invitation to speak this morning. I'm really pleased to be here. Many of you will be familiar with Pobble. We work on behalf of government to support communities and local agencies towards achieving social inclusion outcomes by managing funding and providing supports for government funded programmes. Like every other agency in the country, Pobble has been impacted by COVID. So we have 500 employees, 491 of whom are working remotely. Our core function was making sure that the money kept flowing to providers, to agencies, and that's really, really, really important so that you guys can get on and do your jobs. We have also responded to government's need for new programmes in more recent times. Ivan and Deirdre both referenced the community or this Community and Voluntary Stability Fund that the Department of Rural and Community Development have done. We're administering €35 million of that. The Department of Health have asked us to implement new measures to support agencies like Alone, to support the Seniors Alert Scheme, Care Alliance and Alzheimer's Ireland, and online supports to increase the access to online supports and programmes that support individuals who are struggling with mental health and well-being. And in addition to that, through the Department of Rural and Community Development, we have been administering the Community Support Fund. And for the Department of Children and Youth Affairs, we are currently working our way through the wage subsidy scheme for childcare to ensure that the childcare sector is ready to reopen when Cabinet give the green light, which is likely to be the end of June. So for those of you that know me, I have, that don't know me rather, I have nearly 4 decades. I know I was 12 when I started, nearly 4 decades working in health and social care services in Ireland. More than 20 of those years working in the community and voluntary sector. So I have a great affinity with and understanding of the community and voluntary sector, certainly as it applies to health and social care. But what I would say is one of the big challenges for the community and voluntary sector is ensuring that they adapt to the needs of a changing Ireland. You know, we have a great policy foundation for a changed Ireland. From the Department of Rural and Community Development's perspective, we have a really excellent suite of policy documents. So the 5-year strategy for the community and voluntary sector, the social enterprise policies both published last year, the volunteer strategy that was published this year, and a couple of years ago, the report of the Independent Review Group, which focused on the community and voluntary sector in health and social care services. They provide us, or provide the sector, with very clear policy levers of work to be done with any incoming programme for government. I would say that we or the sector can use this to inform government policy development and to really think about how the community and voluntary sector can assist a newly formed government in their programme for government and in their policy development and the implementation of those excellent policy documents. I would also think that, you know, another challenge or an opportunity, and Alison, my colleague who's going to speak after me, will certainly build on this a little more, I believe, is that COVID, whilst it has been horrendously challenging, has given us a new definition of what constitutes an essential worker. And do we then have an evolving definition of what might constitute an essential service? And again, how can we assist government in building and fleshing that out? In the context of many of the services that are joining the webinar, the summit this morning, who've had fundraised and traded income impacted by the COVID emergency. And it also, the COVID emergency does provide us with opportunity to shine a lens on areas that really require development in the context of this changed Ireland. So, for example, in partnership with the Department of Rural and Community Development, we've begun to look at some data that might correlate COVID death and infection rates with disadvantage, so that the department could consider that as an opportunity to maybe target investment or programmes, or that government might consider it in that way. So we're in the early stages of that. Equally, if you look at the CSO data around youth unemployment, 56% of the young people in Ireland aged 25 and younger are unemployed today. So what does that mean in terms of targeted approaches to our social inclusion and community activation programmes or community services programmes to engage in labour market activation and get those young people back working as soon as we possibly can? So the changed Ireland provides us with lots of challenges, but equally lots of opportunities in that context. I think certainly coming from a previous provider background, and looking right across all the agencies that Hubble relates to in the context of funding, administration and support. It behoves all of us to ensure that best value is achieved in the use of public funds. So we talk about the community and voluntary sector as if we're a group, but it is not a homogenous group. It is highly diverse, pluralistic. It developed organically in response to local and national need. It's vibrant and highly representative of a wide range of social needs. However, you know, provocatively, I would like to maybe pose a question. It's fragmented and it demonstrates a relatively low level of coordination of shared supports. And I know when we've talked previously, the rhetoric around shared supports has been about financial cost, you know, about cost saving. But I believe the sector should be driven by a desire to support harmonization of standards and outcomes for communities. Is it not time for the community and voluntary sector to really partner and really collaborate between services for service delivery? Do the communities served not deserve the development of a shared, mutually agreed way of working or approaches to ensure value for public money invested in the sector? Now, I appreciate that's probably a highly provocative remark, but it is a question, and it certainly is a challenge that I believe the community and voluntary sector are more than able to address if they're willing to come together in that type of spirit. Demonstrating the effectiveness of work delivered. I certainly believe from a challenge perspective, being in a position to demonstrate the effectiveness of the work that the community and voluntary sector delivers and has delivered does really need to be unpicked and looked at. The sector, in my view, needs to become more data enabled, more data informed, and really think through metrics relating to the community and voluntary sector value that go beyond the man hours that volunteers might have substituted for, whilst they're important. Let's think about it in the context of other metrics in terms of community reach, impact measurement, outcomes measurement that are aligned to that suite of national policies that I referenced earlier. You know, demonstrating the impact of social community interventions, you don't have to tell me, it's notoriously difficult. And it's exacerbated, you know, honestly, by the need to report to multiple funders under multiple programs, often with divergent programs, timelines, targets, KPIs, and outcome definitions. So I think a real challenge for the sector, or the different groupings within the sector, is to develop a shared common proposal on what a reporting framework might look like. Instead of saying we don't want to do it that way, put forward proposals about what might work. And equally, rather than focusing just solely on the man hours and the money that the state has saved by using, in the very best sense of the word use, the community and voluntary sector, demonstrating what would not get done if the sector did not exist to deliver these services, many of them essential. And I'll finish up by saying, you know, the programme for government can very much be informed. What did the community and voluntary sector learn from austerity? We're heading into a recession. It's, you know, our Minister for Finance, Public Expenditure and Reform has said that quite publicly. It's not a surprise to us. So can we expect austerity? What did we learn from the last time that can be used to inform government's response to about what worked and what did not in the context of economic recovery for 2020 and beyond? And I think the base, the numbers of people represented through all the community and voluntary agencies across Ireland, the wealth of information that is there just really, really needs to be tapped into. And I think that is a big challenge, to bring that all together in a very coordinated, cohesive way to build that case together. So
great.
I believe I've covered my time slot of 10 minutes, maybe a little over. Okay.
Thank you so much, Anna. That's really fantastic, a contribution. And for everybody's benefit, we will, of course, be producing an output paper from the conference. So all of these great contributions will be captured and we will be adding them into the discussion document, the iterative document that we've already got, as we try to refine that towards a more coherent maybe statement of from the sector's perspective of the challenges and opportunities ahead. So, I mean, you know, Anna covered huge ground there. Big themes just emerging straight off the bat around essential services, around the importance of focusing in on outcomes, some challenges put down there, I think, as well, and identified by Anna in relation to collaborative working and looking at that. The whole big issue in relation to avoiding austerity and learning from that in relation to where we go on from here. And this big piece around how can we show in a way what would be absent from our society if the sector didn't exist. So I'm just cherry picking a few themes there, attempting to string the contributions together for everybody's benefit. So thank you so much, Anna. And Alison, over to you now, your turn to take to the stage, so to speak. And again, just a little bit about the National Federation of Voluntary Service Providers, and then your contribution on the opportunities for the sector as you see them. Thanks very much, Alison.
Thank you very much, Ivan and Deirdre and everyone at the wheel for inviting me to participate today. And here we are all together apart, and it's all very new for all of us, and hopefully we can communicate in a different way today. And I suppose the National Federation of Voluntary Service Providers is an umbrella group of 60 organisations who are not-for-profit and voluntary providers in the intellectual disability services and supports. And we support more than 26,000 people with intellectual disabilities and their families. So when I'm talking today, and Ivan has put the challenge there to us about maybe looking at it in a sector way this morning, I do come from that disability perspective. So some of the examples I'll bring in will be from disability, but it's been really interesting just sitting here watching the names and the good mornings flow through the chat, because it just shows us what a wealth of community knowledge and expertise there is in our virtual room this morning. So hopefully some of the things I'm talking about will resonate and will be different for different areas of our community and voluntary sector. But going back to Ivan's paper and what we've been talking about this morning, I suppose that the COVID-19 has given us an opportunity to understand in a very new way that we are a society and not simply an economy. And we're a society of a very rich tapestry of diversity and solidarity between those diverse parts of our community have never been more evident than they have been right now, because as a community, as a society, we needed to find out how we could ensure that no one was left behind in our response. And I think that has been driving the involvement of community at every level. So we are citizens rather than consumers, and we've understood through this crisis the interconnected relationship of that citizenship in a very new way. So for one person to provide their essential service as a hospital worker, as a person providing support to a person with intellectual disability in their home, we are dependent on other people who are providing childcare, on our spouses, on our, in our wider community. So we're interconnected, and the spectrum of response, as Ivan has said in his paper, is from the informal right to the formal that's delivered by our services. And as an organisation, at an organisational level, the community and voluntary sector stood up big and stood up quickly. So to take an example from the disability services, we had to change how we support people radically. So we began supporting people differently in our residential services. For instance, people in day services have been supported by their families at home. So again, that interconnectedness, we can only deliver our service by relying on family support, by relying on community support, by relying on people who normally provided services in a day context, allowing themselves to work in residential services. And from staff redeploying from their ordinary working environment to different parts of their service, but beyond that into other services provided by health and social care. And there has been a real tangible outcome to that standing up of the voluntary sector. So within our own disability world, I suppose we did a little bit of a survey on the 20th of May, and looking at the residential services and talking, Anna was saying we need to have really strong data, and we need to say what would happen if we weren't present, if we weren't providing the services that we're providing. And if we look at, I suppose, long-term residential facilities were identified as a particular risk by NEFID. And across the 6,000 and more people that we support in residential services, where we would have organisation responsibility for infection prevention and control, 163 people were diagnosed with COVID, and 27 of those were hospitalised. And sadly, 11 passed away, and our condolences and our sincere thoughts are with the families and loved ones of those who passed away. But the scale of infection and the scale of the numbers of people who were affected is really, really tiny. So the number of people who passed away is less, it's 0.18% in a sector that was seen as one of the key risks. And what does that tell us? It tells us that the things that we're doing are very essential. So the services we provide, and I'm just giving a disability example, are not sort of nice to have. And it tells us that this community and voluntary sector have always known and had the skills to be agile, to be flexible, and to have reach right into the community. And those were the things that we've known as the community and voluntary sector that became essential in order to ensure that nobody was left behind during COVID. So as Anna said earlier, we now know, and the government has specified what an essential worker is. And there's such a spectrum of services provided by the community and voluntary sector, but some of those are really essential frontline services. So some of the organisations who are here, and I'm humbled to be amongst all of these amazing service provision, is hospice services, mental health services, frontline disability services. And these are fundamentally important to the citizens of our society that we've been talking about. So COVID provided a window for us to illustrate the kinds of things. For instance, Anna talked about the policies. So the Independent Review Group report, the Catherine Day report, talked about the value of voluntary services. But here we are in COVID being able to demonstrate what that value is in a very, very immediate way. But it also clearly demonstrates some of the inequalities and some of the challenges. So the arbitrary nature of the funding relationship between Section 38 and Section 39 funded organisations. If we just take really simple example, during COVID, within the disability sector, if you work for a Section 38 organisation and you had to self-isolate, you would be on COVID leave. If you work for a Section 39, you're using your own annual leave. And those arbitrary differences in how we're funded just become more apparent as we work through this crisis. And we really have to seize that opportunity to assertively bring the understanding to these key forums of the essential nature of our services, so that we can inform policy and practice, such as the dialogue forum of the IRG. And we must ask the question that Anna has challenged us with this morning: what would be the consequence of the essential services that everybody in our virtual room here is providing if we couldn't deliver them, as Anna has asked? So I think with this new understanding of the essential nature of the community and voluntary sector in delivering services and building on the importance of data, it is a new opportunity for us to rethink how we present data, and so that we must be very strategic in our advocacy. So for instance, if we take outside of the community and voluntary sector, the acute sector has had the benefit of looking at the capacity review to define how funding decisions are made. And we need to be asking for and insisting on data to drive how we are funded and the investment and allocation of the way that the services we provide, with our new understanding that we have gained. So if we are delivering essential services, they have to be funded and supported and invested on in a population-based approach, I would think, and they need to be available on an equitable basis. So the supports provided to the citizens in our society shouldn't be based on whether or not the service is provided by a Section 38 organisation, a Section 39, or delivered directly by the state. They shouldn't be dependent on us as organisations having a good or a poor relationship with our funder, or a good style of negotiation, because they're fundamental services that the citizen requires. So it should be based on their need and on the data rather than those kind of more arbitrary skills and circumstances that organisations individually find themselves in. So as a C&V sector, we have an opportunity to look at what data we should be presenting and how we should be presenting it in the context of ourselves as essential services. In our own social care sector, for example, within disability services, there's a health capacity review for disability services that should be published and should be driving population-based investment in disability services. And I think we need to be advocating on those kinds of basis. So to conclude, really, I think that how we've been delivering services during COVID has given us a unique, a once in a generation opportunity, not only to look at that data and at how we present ourselves, but also how we deliver the support services and supports that we provide. Again, just coming back to a disability example, because I can only really speak from our own experience. The way that people experienced our services during COVID-19 has actually given us a lot of information about the way that we can redesign, reinstate things in a different way. So for instance, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability is the driving force of reform and should be in disability supports. And people have told us, as they've been supported in different ways at home, that maybe having to get on a bus at 7 o'clock in the morning to go to a centre with a lot of other people hasn't been what they've wanted to do. So they've actually experienced something different during COVID. And that's not to say that we have just, I suppose, a superficial understanding that if we just deliver our services over the internet, that it'll be all fine. We really need to look at family resilience. We really need to look at the person and their choices. But we have learned that we can deliver differently. We have made changes that are generation wide changes in 10 weeks. So we know we can do things differently. And what we need to do, I think, as one of our opportunities from COVID is to hear and to listen to the people that we support, to ensure that what we reinstate will be a more flexible, more person-centered, more person-driven approach to providing those essential services we've been talking about. So the examples I've given you obviously have been specific to disability, but I'm sure that there are examples throughout the different sectors that you're supporting people in of how different can be better. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to just share those few thoughts.
Thank you very much, Alison. And again, not wishing to over summarize, but just to draw out the demonstrating effectiveness theme again coming through and the impact and making sure that services on the basis of good data are based on need, the collaborative working piece coming through again, and partnership working and avoiding, of course, the arbitrary basis for funding, the strong essential services theme coming through there as well. So just again, trying to just draw out a few little linking points to enable us to understand the cohesion in the challenges that are there at the macro level. And perhaps, I suspect we will see some parallels now emerging as we transition over. We've been talking about the challenges and opportunities as they relate to the community and voluntary sector as a whole. Now we're going to begin to look at the challenges and opportunities as they relate to individual community and voluntary organizations. And while there's never a complete separation between the two of them, they are somewhat different perspectives, let's say, to bring to bear. So if I could just take this opportunity just to invite Anna, just before I turn to Suzanne Connolly for her contribution. Anna, yeah, if you just leave your camera on just so we're all in the same space and we can see each other, that'd be great, okay? Okay, so without further ado, Suzanne, thank you very much again, along with all of our panelists for being here this morning. So Suzanne, perhaps you could just give us a little bit of an insight into Barnardo's and the work you guys do, and then give us a little bit of your thinking in relation to the challenges as you see it from the perspective of an individual community and voluntary organization. Over to you, Suzanne. Suzanne, you're on mute. You'll need to unmute yourself. Just note that. Yeah, that's great.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. Can you hear me now? Great. And listen, sorry about earlier when I just went offline. It's never happened before. The computer just decided to stop working. So just to say a bit about Bernardo's, we're a national organisation providing a range of services to children, young people and their parents in communities throughout Ireland. We also have some national services. We have a staff group of 430 and we have about 300 volunteers. And we rely on fundraising as much as we rely on state income in order to be able to function as an organisation. So to start, I suppose, with the challenges, what we're really aware of in Bernardo's is we have had to fundamentally change what we do and the way we provide services, like all of you had in the context of COVID. So as an organisation that really didn't use digital devices at all to work with children and parents, we've had to now do things like FaceTime, we've had to connect in ways of having meetings, etc., etc. And that has been very, very different for us. We're aware that while there has been some positives, it also fundamentally can limit the way in which you perceive and work and understand what's going on for people within their homes. Because even here, as we are communicating, what's great to be able to do it, it's not the same, as far as I'm concerned, as being in a room. You can't pick up on the non-verbal, you can't be sensitive to nuance, and we feel that is a real challenge going forward in our work, because we know that we're going to be living with COVID for quite a considerable time into the future. The other challenge that we would see is that people's anxiety levels in general are quite high, and now that we're all living with a degree of uncertainty, which to echo previous points is actually quite unprecedented. So in that sense, there's a challenge really, we would see it in Bernardo's, of people's social and emotional well-being. A lot of attention has been given to physical health, but I would worry about people's social and emotional well-being. And I suppose the priority is being given at government level to make decisions that probably don't give consideration to people's overall well-being in the context of what we need to function effectively as human beings in society. And I think it's very hard to get any different argument in place because there's an understandable real concern about physical health. So the other thing that we're aware of, I suppose, as service providers, and I'm sure this is something that would resonate with a lot of you listening, is that the staff and the volunteers in Bernardo's have given incredibly amount of energy, creativity over the last 10 weeks. And the challenge is, can that be sustained? There's a challenge for us in trying to get our staff to take their leave because people are at a very heightened level of activity, and it's actually quite hard to begin to say, we need to slow down, we're in here for the long haul, which we are. So that the other thing that we're aware of, that a lot of staff are now working from home. They've shown a lot of flexibility in that regard, but we're worried about the emotional boundaries for staff as well, because then there really is no break between your work, no psychological break between your work and your life outside, if you like. And the other thing we're worried about as well is how do you get that emotional support that you normally get? You've done some work in the community, you've been, whatever your work is, you come back into an environment where you're with your colleagues. It's not the same as having to ring up. It isn't that informal support. So that's really from a service delivery point of view, is I would see the challenges. We then have to think through then is about the personal protective equipment, the implication of using that for our connection with the people with whom we work, and also the cost of it. We're aware going forward in terms of the global recession, and to quote what Anna was saying earlier about what happened during austerity, is that people who need services the most probably suffered most in that context, and it's going to be very, very hard in the range of demands on the Exchequer to remind the government and key decision makers that sometimes people who have less of a voice really do need to be heard, and that we can't forget that. But I think that is going to be a challenge, because the real difficulty, I think, for our sector is we don't have political champions. we're constantly, and what I really agree with the need to be accountable and use data, I have to be completely honest and say that sometimes I really struggle with the fact that we constantly have to justify the need for our existence, constantly. I don't think that applies to other sectors in the same way. And also, there's times where I really want to remind the government and civil servants, this is public finance. And our sector, who does so much for people who need us, we have a right to that, and our service users have a right to that. So I think that's an important point. The other thing I think that in terms of fundraising is our real challenge is that we are competing with each other a lot of the time. I think that the Irish public is incredibly generous. However, I do worry that the public may get really a bit sick of being asked for money all the time, and then I have to be honest. Then I get heightened anxiety then when there's any negative press in relation to our sector, and I worry when we go back into austerity is that there will be a focus, and there'll be a focus on the spending in general, which I think is reasonable, but there'll be a heightened focus on our sector. There'll be, because sometimes we have a combination of volunteer-led organisations and staff-led organisations with boards, and they can be very divisive then when we get into the issue of how money is spent. So that's going to be a challenge for how do we stick together in a time that naturally is going to be very challenging in terms of the competition for resources. Let me see what I want to say. I think the other thing that we'd have to really work on as well is the retaining of high quality staff, because I think there'll be a lot of competition out there, and I know myself is in my role in Bernardo's, there comes a time when my staff get a bit sick of being told how great they are. They want better conditions. Now they've good conditions, and I know they've good conditions, but they sometimes say, well, why? They tend to compare themselves with the public sector as opposed to other sectors, and I just think it's just really challenging, and we want to. Our staff deserve the same recognition. So I think I've been vociferous enough. I feel I can sort of finish there. I suppose I'm not sure I've used all my time, or I may have used all my time.
Just, I'm interested. Did the question of the compliance and regulatory regime come up? Is that a challenge in relation to the from Bernardo's perspective, from your own perspective?
Well, and I think that's a good question. I think in Bernardo's, I think we are fortunate in the sense that we do have resources to meet what are very demanding requirements in terms of compliance and audit, and I agree with us being accountable, but sometimes I feel that there's too much attention paid to certain things at the expense of other things. And I mean, sometimes the degree, so just to clarify, an organisation like Bernard's, because we are fortunate with some of our resources, we can give that attention, but for smaller charities, I just wonder about that. We talk about the need for data and evidence and impact. But if you're spending a lot of your time audibly, returning what you need to return in terms of the demands of people who give us money, and at the same time having to fundraise, and at the same time having to worry about whether you're going to have enough resources, you actually don't have sufficient time or energy. I'd like to be able to. So I suppose what I would like to say is that I would know from the earlier services that the government could actually look to itself to streamline what they do to make it easier for us. So you have the health, you have two different functions in the department, the government, both asking us for quite similar returns, and why can't they streamline themselves in order to make it easier for us?
Okay. Thank you very much, Suzanne. You just broke up there briefly, but you came back, so that's good. And thanks just for engaging around that particular point. So again, folks, strong themes emerging there in relation to funding and funding adequacy and the competition over resources. Can everybody,
taking my meetings to
if I can ask everybody else to mute, please, apart from the panelists who are on the platform. Thank you very much. Strong themes coming out, and again, an interesting one in relation to staff and the challenges that staff have been through, and the emotional support that staff require, and where that's going to come from, and issues in relation to attracting and retaining staff. So very important themes that we'll come back to again. Thank you very much, Suzanne, for that. And now just turning to Tracy, just in relation to looking at some of the opportunities that may be there from the perspective of the individual organisation level, the micro level. And again, Tracy, just a few words about the Daughters of Charity, and then maybe elaborate on your thinking in relation to opportunities. Thanks very much.
Great, thank you very much, Ivan. And last is a tough act to follow, to be fair, from Anna, Alison's and Suzanne's contributions. So I'll give it my best shot. So just to say thank you very much for the opportunity to be here, I suppose, to talk about the real issues now that organising and the opportunities that we can hopefully bring to bear now during this COVID pandemic and afterwards. So just to give you a little bit of a background on Daughters of Charity Child and Family Service, our organisation was established in 1985. We have 180 staff, roughly, working in 17 Dublin and Wicklow. We provide therapeutic child and family services. We also provide assessments for Tusla Social Work Department, early year services as well for families. We have been overwhelmed by, since COVID hit. It has been absolutely unprecedented. We have carried out in the last 7 weeks over 2,000 sessions. We have been very fortunate in that 85% of our families have actually continued to engage, while we have been, I suppose, working remotely, and most of the time our assessment services still operated at a centre-based level during the period for social work. However, there has been really significant engagement from all families, which really demonstrates that there is a very strong, I suppose, buy-in and a very strong level of support that families need from organisations such as ourselves. Just having a quick look at some of the stats over the past period of time, 33% of our support was focused on parenting, which is not surprising because we know that parents are struggling to manage children maybe being at home or caring responsibilities and trying to work from home, and maybe people being ill. 25% of that also stats were in relation to mental health support. So again, echoing Suzanne's point, there was a huge amount of need in relation to social and emotional support. And I suppose worryingly, 25% were violence related. So in relation to domestic violence, coercive control, and other violence related issues as well. So I suppose what that indicates is for organisations such as ourselves, there is a huge tsunami of need that we are going to have to face coming down the track. And what does that mean in relation to the opportunities that we as organisations can really try and grasp and develop and moving forward? And I think one of the key learnings for us as an organisation, and I know from discussions with other colleagues in other organisations as well, has been that when all other social structures crumbled because of COVID, so when the ways that we engage through social interaction, through going to work, through picking up the phone, through going for coffee, and being able to interact, when all of that crumbled, what was there was organisations like ourselves. But more than that, it was the community and voluntary values that underpin all of that. They remained and they stepped up. And I think that is a huge organisational learning for all of us, that when the chips are down, it is organisations and I suppose the voluntary sector overall, but from an organisation perspective, never more so has there been a need for organisations to actually step in and to step up. So bearing in mind that many of our staff, I suppose all of our staff, because they're individuals that are impacted by the pandemic, were also trying to manage the impact of that on their own lives, there was a huge, fantastic coming together of organisations. And I think that's one of the huge opportunities that we can see now moving forward, organisations connected like never before. So there were fantastic facilitated sessions by the Wheel and other bodies where there was a coming together of organisations to talk about the challenges, but also to talk about ways of developing and shared learning and how we could support each other as individual organisations. That's quite unique, and it's unique for the reasons I would feel that Suzanne has mentioned in relation to the fact that organisations are competing. They're competing for funding, sometimes they're competing for referrals. So there was an absolute, complete bedding down of the values within the sector and the values within organisations, and how organisations were able to support each other in overcoming those challenges as well. I think one of the huge benefits and opportunities for organisations has been COVID-19 has absolutely shed back everything to values. So it's the value-based work that every organisation, of which we have whatever 460 here, that is what underpins each organisation in the community and voluntary sector. And never more so have we seen that absolute stepping up of organisations to just reconnect with values. And that gives us fantastic opportunities, because it gives us opportunities to reactivate, I suppose, the energy within each of our individual organisations. So our staff are much more, while there's a huge learning curve in being able to transition maybe to remote working and the challenges that raises, always there's a focus on why are we here? We're here to meet the needs of those that need it most. And it's that common language of values, I think, and that can continue moving forward and gives a really good opportunity for organisations. Fantastic collaboration and partnership, wonderful opportunities for people to engage remotely, developing new training, great free training that's been available for staff to upskill as well, using new technology, so really good opportunities for organisations to actually look at that. And within that, to look at data. So I know all of my colleagues previously have mentioned data. For us as an organisation, we have really been able to drill into the data, and we've really been able to get a sense of actually what are these new emerging needs, and how do we as an organisation have to reconfigure and adapt our services moving forward so that we are focusing on this new and emerging need. And there's opportunities for organisations to pool that data together. So I think that's a very, very profound way that we can actually really develop as an organisation and bring together those really good data sets, and look at what that means for how we support families, children, and those most in need moving forward. We've had to think outside the box. So I think we've all spent a lot of time on strategic plans. We have just finalised our 5-year strategic plan. And it pains me to say we will need to revisit it in some shape or form, because we are going to be living with COVID-19 for a long time. We are going to have to readjust and reconfigure how we do our services, and more than likely with reduced budgets. So again, if we can bring it back to the values and the need, then we will be much better placed to be able to look at that moving forward. I think there's a really, really good opportunity for all of us to actually learn as a global community, because COVID has impacted the whole world. So the struggles that we are dealing with as individual organisations and how we're responding to our most needy is something that we can try and learn from at a global level, because every country has been impacted, every society has been impacted, social inequalities have become more profound, more pronounced, more compounded. So there's a really good opportunity for organisations to connect with other organisations in different countries and different communities to get a sense of globally what are the needs and how can we ensure that we respond to that moving forward. And finally, I think what's really important for organisations is to show leadership. So as a sector, there's a fantastic opportunity for us to show leadership, but as individual organisations, I suppose we need to park some of the anxieties that we have around funding and try and come together to look at what does that mean for all of us. Is there ways that we can be more cost effective? Is there ways that we can look at duplication, that we can share things between services? There's good opportunities for us to do that moving forward. We need to live the values. I think we need to advocate as a united voice, all organisations to government, to continue the focus on the value come out, so that focus on people, rather than economy. And we need to add to government in relation to that. Ivan, can you hear me?
Yeah, Tracy, that's fine. I'm going to ask you just to conclude there now, just to give you a bit of feedback from the floor in relation to some questions. Clearly, there's enormous interest in all of this. So just if you can conclude your contribution now, that'd be great. Thanks very much.
So just finally, I suppose what we really have to know is that what is the impact if we weren't here? So I think that's a really important question posed by Anna. And Alison and Suzanne has also focused a little bit on it in her presentation. It's profound and unfathomable, I think. The community and voluntary sector were here. They set up services in the state where there were no other services. We know the impact on communities of services closing and organisations closing. We need to ensure that there remain the focus on local need rather than this focus on value and efficiency. And we have a really good opportunity to shape that now moving forward.
Thank you so much, Tracy. Okay, I'm kind of gobsmacked by the quality of all of the contributions here, just in relation to the extensive identification and coverage of really all of the issues. I think from my many years working in the Director of Public Policy role in the Wheel as they relate to the sector and to organisations individually. I'll thank you all properly in a few moments, but thank you, Tracy. I'm just going to make a few just remarks. Clearly, we could have run this session for 3 hours, okay, to engage around these themes and do them the justice, any kind of justice. What our ambition here has been is simply to surface the issues as very experienced practitioners in the sector understand them to be, and I think we've done that. I have some questions from the floor. We don't have time to engage in questions and answers, unfortunately, in the way that we ideally would have liked, but people have been submitting them. So I'm just going to read some of these questions out for everybody just to consider. I'll certainly be reviewing this entire session on video again to learn from it more. And I, again, would recommend our participants perhaps to do the same and to keep in touch with us and follow up directly with Lily with regard to these questions, okay? We'll commit to continue the engagement with people who've asked questions post this session. And what we're trying to do here is build widespread support and understanding for these issues and to ground our advocacy work collaboratively and in the real world of participants. So I'd encourage you, we will come back in relation to the questions. So for example, some questions that have been coming through. A question from Anne Flynn in Safe Ireland. Is the challenge not for the government funders and departments to come together and standardise the reporting requirements for the community sector, instead of having multiple reporting formats and targets, which are funder specific and don't support evidence-based planning for the community sector? Okay, so there's just an example of a question. I'm going to read a few more out. We still have 5 minutes, and then I'll ask you to, just for your one message to government, folks. So just consider that. What is the one sentence you would want government to hear? There's a programme for government being negotiated as we speak. We're all anticipating developments next week. We have an opportunity to shape the programme for government. There are influential people listening in here this morning, so I'll ask you all to consider what's the one sentence that you would want government to include in the programme for government. A question from Anna Dewart at Dublin Volunteer Centre. Have you come across any examples here or internationally of what a good shared cohesive reporting framework might look like? Countries or organisations we might learn from. So again, looking abroad to see whether there's some good practice there, relating back to a point made earlier by Anna in relation to the sector understanding better what its own data requirements are and taking the lead perhaps in looking to collaboratively shape a more standardised and appropriate, let's say, and flexible at the same time reporting framework. There were questions about that were a variation of this. How can the COVID era change or improve reporting and departmental coordination going forward? So interesting, a focus on the statutory side there. And, you know, we're in the community and voluntary sector. We're in relationships with individual funding departments and agencies often, but we're all engaged in a collective mission, and we really need to try. We're often blamed as a sector for too much fragmentation, but the system that we engage with drives that fragmentation and drives that competition over resources. So again, pointing towards the need for much more close partnership working with our statutory counterparts. Another interesting question from Nadette Foley, Glen Cree Centre for Peace and Reconciliation. The question goes, Anna Shakespeare mentioned that Pobble is working with the Department of Rural and Community Development to look at COVID-19 data to see if they have had a disproportionate impact on disadvantaged communities. Can she say anything about the lack of a universal ethnic identifier in the current collection of data on COVID-19? The small-scale statistics which have emerged on the Traveller and Roma minorities here in Dublin show shocking levels of COVID-19 diagnosis in a small sample. So just something for Pobble to keep in mind in relation to the work that's going on there. A question from Rare Diseases Ireland to Alison specifically. Alison, you don't need to answer, but just it's an indication of the sparks that the conversation has set off. It's essential services are important metrics, but can't define us. Essential services are currently very narrowly defined, and we understand this, and perhaps our point here is to ensure that services based on need are re-understood as essential services, and essential work has come to the fore, so essential services could be valued in the same way as essential work has been recognized. As a sector, we're trying to redefine some of these essential services to drive change in society. We need to be careful and should not permit government to dictate what is essential for our users. If we do, we run the risk of standing still. We also need to ensure that the needs of the individual are captured and catered for. A question from Claire Cashman, the National Forum of Family Resource Centres. Claire says, I totally reject the suggestion that our sector and our communities will have to bear the costs of the recession. It is up to governments to ensure that they protect our sector and look to other more lucrative areas to raise the necessary taxes. Let's not get sucked into this messaging from government, okay? I have other questions as well, but I'll have to stop there. But it's just to give you an indication of the kind of conversation that we could have had if we extended it, and we'll be coming back to many of these themes in future summits. So folks, bringing it to a conclusion, and before I say the formal thanks, 1 minute each, tops, in fact 30 seconds if you can do it, on what your one message from the sector to government would be. I'll go in the same order that we started off the contribution. So Anna, it's over to you.
Okay, thanks, Ivan. I started off by saying that Ireland has a fantastic set of policy documents setting out what should be our government's ambition for the community and voluntary sector, and a number of reports that set out in the context of health and social care services as well. So the independent review group in particular. I suppose what I would say to the community and voluntary sector as a whole is to support government in implementing these policies, make it the ambition to bring them to life, and support that work through the programme for government, and work with the government departments to ensure that life is breathed in full to those excellent policy frameworks, because that's how we will get a lot of the work done.
Thank you very much, Alison. Anna, clearly understood message and something to build on. Alison.
So I suppose the way in which society responded and the very dramatic measures that the government took were about making sure that nobody was left behind in the COVID response. So my message to government, or our message, I think, would be, how do we ensure that nobody is left behind collaboratively as we begin to recover as a society and we begin to rebuild? And how we must ask the government to authentically engage with the community and voluntary sector to co-create solutions that would value what we've learned and value everything that the other contributors have been saying about the values-based supports and the agile, flexible nature, the reach that we have to individuals and their families and the people we support. And to do that, we're going to need multi-annual funding. We're going to need the independent review group dialogue forum to work well. It's those authentic measures that will ensure that that no one is left behind.
Thank you, Alison. Wonderfully knit together, and we can see how the agenda flows out of that simple commitment to engage with the sector and putting values to the fore. Suzanne. That's great, Suzanne. We can hear you now. Go ahead.
Okay, so I would say to the government to put money behind your verbal mouthing of how great the sector is, and to recognise that the sector does implement the policies.
I love it. Very succinct, Suzanne. Very good, very effective. Put the money where your mouth is. And Tracy.
Yeah, I think it will be important to, I suppose, state that governments are transient. The community and voluntary sector is not. The community and voluntary sector was there from the beginning and will be to the end. And I think it's important that the new government recognise the sector, pay us what we need to be paid, and take into account the value that the community and voluntary sector has demonstrated, and that it needs to be protected and nurtured. And that's demonstrated through preservation of funding and ensuring that they're supporting of growth and innovation within the sector and within communities.
Thank you so much to Anna, to Alison, to Suzanne, and to Tracy for, I have to say, an extraordinary session. I would have only loved for the conversation to have gone on for longer. In a way, all we did was tee up the issues for further discussion now over the coming weeks and months. As I've indicated, we'll be looking to support and facilitate and work collaboratively with all of the other representative networks and federations that are there. We have a great opportunity, I believe, to harvest these messages and bring them to a point of practical pressure and bring them to bear in a sector that is becoming increasingly recognized, and a sector, the value of which has come absolutely to the fore as a result of the crisis, and the values that sustain the sector in its work. So on behalf of everybody here, sticking more or less to time, I want to, from the bottom of my heart, thank the four of you for agreeing to take the risk and go out on a limb in this kind of a format, to go with us on an experimental journey and to show that we can effectively communicate and collaborate around policy and advocacy work into the future. And on behalf of, because we can't get that reaction from all of the 460 plus people who are participating today in the form of a clap hands, I'm just going to clap my hands and thank you very, very much. Okay. So that's the formal conclusion of this session. We'll be back in touch with all conference registrants with further communications post-conference and with further iterations of the discussion paper that we circulated earlier. And Deirdre will make some additional remarks in relation to follow-up when she's bringing her session to a conclusion. So if I can ask our panelists to mute themselves now and to turn off their cameras. I'm now going to pass over to our chairperson, Paul O'Sullivan, to say a few words, and over to you, Paul. I'm now going to unmute myself or mute myself and stop the video. So Paul, over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ivan. That was a really interesting and enlightening discussion. I must say, I find this a lot more daunting than standing up in front of 1,000 people. And Anne and Alison and Suzanne and Tracy, you did a wonderful job. Thank you for your insights, and well done, Ivan, for really good, excellent facilitation. I'm sure that all of you are eagerly awaiting our next session, where Deirdre Garvey, our CEO, will be in conversation with the Secretary General of the Department of Rural and Community Development, Kevin McCarthy. I am Paul O'Sullivan, and I am Chair of the Wheel. My day job is the Chief Executive Officer of Cloncredo Community Loan Finance. Here in Cloncredo, we've had first-hand experience of the impact of COVID-19. For those of you that don't know us, we have been providing loan finance to community organisations since 1996 and have supported over 1,900 groups in that time with €135 million disbursed. Today, we have 500 partner organisations, charities, local sports clubs, social enterprises, community organisations on our loan book, which stands at €35 million. We've been having regular conversations with these community organisations, and we hear that the vast majority are suffering a double blow from the pandemic. On the one hand, their ability to function, hold events, and raise income is greatly diminished. And while on the other hand, the demand for their services has increased exponentially, and as local communities are coming under increasing financial economic strain. Charities can't fundraise, social enterprises have had their ability to trade decimated, and sports and other community organisations and centres are unable to use or rent out their premises. The losses, as we've heard earlier, are running to hundreds of millions of euro. And really, this must be addressed by the new government. What must be remembered is that none of these organisations undertake their work for private gain or to produce a shareholder dividend. They provide much needed local services, aiming to break even with all the surpluses being ploughed back into the local community. Any loss or collapse of services or delivery by these organisations will be a huge loss to local communities and nationally. The most marginalised will be the people that are most affected. Each of the previous panelists spoke in different ways of the urgent need to reset the relationship between the sector and the state. And just in case the fiscal hawks amongst our policymakers continue to be deaf to the voices of the social sector, I would urge them to read what one of their own kind, the chief economist of the Bank of England, Andy Haldane, said recently. He said, and I quote, "We need to invest the rich endowment of social capital created by the crisis by rethinking and rebuilding the institutional immune system that is our social sector." Ireland is fortunate to have a strong sense of community that is helping us in the battle against COVID-19. That sense of community didn't come from nowhere. It has been developed and nurtured over the years by grassroots community-based organisations up and down this country, many of whom developed into large-scale charities. The economic impact of the pandemic could be fatal for many of them. As Taoiseach said earlier, the social sector has made an extraordinary contribution to the fight in suppressing COVID. However, the social ecosystem that we relied on as we enter 2020 may not be there in 2021, unless the new government devotes considerable policy priority and resources to restoring confidence and stability. We are delighted that Kevin McCarthy will be joining Deirdre in conversation in the next session. Kevin and Deirdre have got to know each other very well over recent weeks as they led their respective sides in the recent discussions that led to the very welcome 35 million stability fund. Kevin, who, while relatively recent, new to the sector, has since his appointment to the role of Secretary General in December 2017, ensured that for the first time, the government adopted a suite of 3 policies: volunteering, community and voluntary activity, and social enterprise. As Anna Shakespeare said earlier, they are an excellent suite of documents. If implemented, these can guide the government's approach to nurturing a strong and vibrant social sector. Kevin and his department rose to the COVID challenge, and the Stability Fund for Frontline Services is an important and welcome first step. Before handing over to Deirdre for the next session, I want to thank her and her team for the extraordinary work that they've done in the last 3 months. I'm saying this not just on behalf of the board, which I chair, nor indeed on behalf of the 1,800 members, but also on behalf of the thousands of social organisations up and down this country who've been able to turn to the wheel for credible, reliable information and advice, as well as effective representation with government. Deirdre has led the wheel for the last 21 years, and as CEO, we are fortunate to have someone of her calibre and experience at this critical time. Without further ado, I will now turn off my camera, turn off my microphone, and hand you over to Deirdre Garvey. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul, and I really appreciate those kind words towards me personally. But it isn't about me, and it is about our members, and it is about all of the work that goes on in the sector, because that's what makes our sector a very special place. And I guess we who work in the wheel are very privileged to be able to support the sector in this hour of need. Now, I have to say, I echo your thoughts, Paul, about the very impressive conversation that we've had so far, and it is really extraordinary. You plan these things and you think you couldn't possibly stick a Zoom meeting for longer than 2 hours, and that's why we're splitting things up over the next month. But I do think I'd love to get stuck into some of those discussions. And hey ho, I'm going to have a chance now, and I'm gambling that Kevin McCarthy, the Secretary General, thank you very much, Kevin, for switching on your camera and your microphone. You are very, very welcome. And thank you very much for participating in this conversation. We have about 20 minutes. I do know, Kevin, that you've been here since the get-go, so you've been listening to the whole conversation to date. And notwithstanding the fact that you are very well versed in our sector, as Paul says, you're heading up the department that has produced, well, 2 published strategies and 2 sort of not quite so published strategies in terms of our sector. So the social enterprise and the CV sector 5-year strategy was published to great welcome last year, and indeed the volunteering strategy and indeed the rural strategy, I think, fell at the last hurdle in one sense of the general election, and might have been ready to go in some respect. So, but first, before we get started, I really just want to express, I guess I'm aware that when I made my remarks at the beginning of the event about people having been bereaved during COVID-19 crisis, I'm very well aware that throughout the discussions and the negotiations around that stability package, that you yourself suffered your own personal loss. So I just wanted to acknowledge that and to say that you and your department have provided excellent leadership through the community response, and the minister and the ministers. So just to sort of note I guess the level of professionalism that was conducted and showed to our sector at that time. So notwithstanding some of the comments, the very succinct comment from Suzanne Connolly about asking government to put money behind the verbal mouthing, which I thought was quite an interesting way of getting through a lot of policy documentation. We'll come back to that, Kevin, but what I wanted to do first of all was to give you an opportunity just to ask you, in light of COVID-19, which all of us in this room or this virtual room are adapting our business models and our service models and our understanding of how we can create impact. In light of that, in light of the new departments that your department has published and almost published, maybe you could share with the group initially your thoughts on the departmental priorities, I guess, over the coming period, but this year and I guess into the medium term of the beginning of next year. And we'll kick it off from there, if that's okay. We have about just 15 minutes and I'll stop us at 25 past because I just want to close up precisely on time. So you're very welcome, and I invite you to maybe just say your initial few words. Thank you.
Okay, thanks Deirdre, and thanks first of all for your very kind words of welcome and for the invitation to join this in these unique circumstances. And like others, it is different. I'm very conscious that there are people from every community across the country joining us here this morning, and it is a real delight to be able to join in this way. And I just would like to congratulate the Wheel on being able to overcome the current challenges and succeed in bringing people together. And there's been a lot of talk about the connectedness and the togetherness that has been such a strong feature of the national response over the last number of weeks, and it's brilliant to be able to reflect on that in a collective way in this different and new format. So congratulations and thanks to the Wheel on their leadership on that. Just to I suppose reflect a little bit on how the COVID crisis has impacted on the department and its priorities. I mean, I think like everybody else, we've been thrown into a whole new world in terms of how we operate as a department. That's just what I suppose important to acknowledge in the first instance. We've had to adapt our own business models, so we're all obviously operating remotely. We went into, I suppose, crisis and response mode from day one, worked closely with yourselves in respect of whether it was the initial community response, putting contingency plans in place around ensuring that payments get to the organisations that need them most, providing reassurance in respect of things like CSP payments and SICAP payments, which of course are absolutely essential lifelines for both organisations and individuals throughout society. And I think working and building on the relationships that have been established over a good period of time between the department and representatives in the sector, not least yourselves, to as creatively as we could, as innovatively and as quickly as we could, organise a response and organise, I suppose, the national response in terms of our role across government in trying to foster collaboration and working with colleagues across government to ensure that the conditions that were necessary for organisations on the ground to respond in the ways that they needed to respond, that they were supported in doing that. So, I mean, the initial conversations that we had around the community champions, for example, some of the initiatives that were put in place around whether it was the senior alerts befriending service, the emergency supports for organisations involved in the community call response itself, and the marshalling of resources around that. All of those were very quick responses that really needed people to think on their feet within the department, across the sector, us engaging with yourselves on the ideas, on the responses, on the needs. And I think, you know, when you talk about priorities, I think that has certainly it has certainly impacted in a huge way, A, on how we do our business, B, on the immediate need and the immediate priorities in the short term. But now it's impacting on what we see for the future and the priorities, the objectives that we need to move forward on over the next number of months. And, you know, you've talked about the policy framework that's now in place, both the developed and published policy framework and the policy framework that is awaited. And they're all important pieces of the jigsaw. And there's huge implementation challenges there. The policy framework themselves or itself, the various elements of it, was the product of a lot of partnership, a co-production ethos has informed it, and that's certainly going to have to inform the implementation phase, which is already underway in terms of social enterprise and the C&V strategy. But I suppose for government, and as we hopefully move into a new phase in terms of national government and the formation of a new administration, recovery is now the key challenge, and how we support communities in ensuring that communities are at the centre of the recovery. How we ensure that the lessons learned over the last number of weeks around the rich resources that are there at community level, around our collective capacity nationally and locally to get things done, to innovate, to adapt, to transform, how we engage with one another, how we engage with the most marginalised, how we reach the most marginalised, how we ensure that nobody is left behind in the ways that we have succeeded over the last number of weeks. We need to ensure that all of those principles inform the approach to recovery, and that we, as a department, I suppose, will be seeking to influence all of those plans, all of those objectives, that core overriding objective that will form the agenda of the next administration. That social inclusion is at the heart of what it sees in terms of the opportunity, that the citizen and communities are at the heart of how we approach this, that the kind of re-evaluation of what's important in society that has again been such a feature of the response over the last number of weeks, that we don't lose sight of, I suppose, that re-evaluation that we've all benefited from. And there's been a lot of talk about values this morning, and I think globally there's been a reappraisal of the sort of values that inform the approach to the administration of public services, the delivery of public services, and our view of society and the economy. I'll stop it there because I know you have loads of questions, Deirdre.
Yeah, so thank you. That's a great start. And I guess the question was well, how does that in itself become institutionalized from your perspective? I mean, I know there's an awful lot that we don't know, right? Including the fact that we actually don't have a government. This department with this agenda has really been passed from one department to another in terms of its journey through government, from originally the white paper social protection, and then it was in its own sort of rural and community Gaeltacht affairs, and then it was over in environment and local government, and now it's back in rural and community development. So what we don't know, and certainly the Wheel and many others have asked that our sector, the social sector, as Paul O'Sullivan has yet another name for our sector in terms of everything else. So we will, on the assumption that there is a version of this department with a senior minister with this agenda, because we need to find some solid grounds, and we know that that's not necessarily true. Paul quoted the governor of the Bank of England about the institutional immunity, like that our social sector is our country's and our society's institutional immunity, you know, using that language of the pandemic we've heard so much of. And you've there spoken about the acknowledgement in the system, and all of us, I think, about the reprioritization of values. How does that manifest itself in a relationship with government, whereby for so much of the sector, I guess what would be called government funded, what the citizens of the country would understand as, you know, public services that should be, or that are state funded or provided by the state, where our sector has so many of those, I guess, service providers funded by the state, and then very often those costs are subsidized by fundraising and self-generated income. So, and then there's the community infrastructure, the befriending service, the Meals on Wheels, the neighbourhood watch, and everything in between that we've seen in this cocooning phase. What does it look like when a government or when a department says, you know, we need to learn from the understanding of the new values? Does that look like a reappraisal of the strategies? Does it look like and I guess an authentic engagement, which is what some of our previous speakers, you know, were looking for? And what in your mind constitutes an authentic engagement?
Yeah, I mean, I'm struck by what one of the panelists said there around the kind of the unique engagement that people experienced at our organizational level over the last number of weeks, organizations coming together in ways that they hadn't before. And like if I reflect on what has happened at the centre, there has been a similar experience at the centre in terms of how government departments have engaged and interacted in a time of crisis. And that has enabled things to happen that certainly in normal circumstances wouldn't happen in the creative, responsive ways that they were enabled to happen in the current context. So there's certainly, I think, lessons that we can draw around how we do our business, or lessons certainly that we need to reflect on around how we do our business. If it can be done in a crisis, why can it not be done in other circumstances? If there's a collective consensus around what's important, where we need to go, what the priorities are, we've seen that there's a capacity to make things happen, to deliver on those. So there's certainly some reflection, I think, in terms of how we can better harness all of the potential that we have seen unleashed over recent weeks. And you know, when you look at the response on the ground in terms of communities, the community spirit, almost I suppose you could describe it as a rejuvenation of community spirit, if that's not unfair. I know community spirit has always been there, and we've always acknowledged and prized it and supported it, but it has come to the fore in a way that has just been very uplifting to witness, I think, for everybody across society. And I think it has generated potentially an enthusiasm for people to continue to contribute to their communities, to continue to volunteer, to continue to look out for those that are, you know, at risk of being left behind. Perhaps for people to reflect a little bit more on who they do see as being marginalized or vulnerable in our communities, maybe to slow down in terms of their own lives and take stock of what they see as being important. So it has generated, I think, a wider societal sort of reevaluation of our values that does create an opportunity to feed into, and I would be amazed if we don't see it feeding into an articulation of a set of values and objectives that will be at the heart of a new programme for government, in terms of government reflecting on what society has articulated now as being important, as being valuable, and putting that at the heart of the priority of the next administration. So we have a key role as a department in making sure that works, that it works in terms of ensuring that the relationship between government at the centre, community and voluntary organisations on the ground, social enterprises on the ground, charities, that is effective. That we organise ourselves, we interact in a way that makes sense for everybody, that works effectively for everybody, that we work across government in a way that the policy framework that is established and being established can be effective in actually translating into change, support, action, a supportive environment on the ground for organizations that are seeking to deliver services.
Thanks very much. How time flies. I'm coming up to my last or my second last question, if that's okay. I guess, you know, what you said about community spirit, etc. You saw my wry smile in the sense that, and then you acknowledged, correct, you know, absolutely, that community spirit has always been there. Ireland has had an extraordinary rich national asset, if we want to use that kind of language, in our community connections, and I think it makes us particularly unique, and it's a treasure trove, and like at times of crisis it just leaps to the fore so that nobody can actually not notice. So you are right, absolutely there. But those things don't happen by fresh air. Those things are nurtured and harnessed and fostered, and if you want to use the language of business, incubated within local community and voluntary organizations, non-profits. And those organizations are facing a real practical existential crisis. We know from the Charity Regulator survey that 54% think they might have problems in 6 months. We also know from the Charity Regulator survey that 52% have reached out in ways, as you have noted, and I did earlier in my speech, in different ways to different colleagues to collaborate across the sector. So there is massive innovation happening and massive connections and collaborations, and I guess focus on shared working happening. In that submission that was collectively made, that made the case for the Stability Fund, we also made the case for, I guess, a support for organisations to figure out their future for themselves, feasibility studies about new service deliveries, feasibility studies about new income generation. We asked for an engagement around the evidence gathering as to, like, a 40 million Stability Fund doesn't, in one sense, it was never intended to fund all of the services that our charitable organisations provide in this country. That was not the purpose of it. But that question still remains unanswered. So the evidence around what that gap and that need is, because it's the services that are at threat here. It's the services rather than the organisations. And then, you know, where does the sector go next in terms of, from your perspective? Because, you know, it would just be very helpful in our sort of the last input from yourself, if you could let us, you know, share some of that, where now from your perspective on those issues. Yeah, because they're burning platform issues for many of our organizations here today.
They are, yeah, and I mean, I suppose, you know, when we talk about reflecting on where we're at now, I mean, the world has changed. It has changed over the last number of weeks. It's not going back. And we're all trying to make sense of this new world in which we will be operating. You know, when people in the excellent panel discussion referred to the organizational challenges which are shared across, and those are collective challenges, obviously. I suppose there's a couple of things there. I mentioned the sort of the co-production ethos, which I think has informed our approach to the work in developing the elements of the policy framework. I think that's going to sustain us. That relationship has worked well for us. It has worked well for us in the development of the policy framework. It has worked well for us in the development of the responses that we have needed over the recent weeks. And it's going to work well for us in the future as we continue to grapple with the challenges that are going to evolve all the time. And I suppose our knowledge of the world around us is evolving all the time. When we set out on the discussion on the Stability Fund, we were all sort of clambering in the dark a little bit in terms of trying to make sense of the problem, trying to define the problem, trying to get our heads around it, essentially, and a lot of variables, a lot of unknowns in the mix, some of which have begun to clarify themselves, many of them which haven't. And we're going to continue to be operating in this sort of uncertain environment for some time to come. So I think we have to work closely together to continue to make sense of what that environment is and what it means for the sector. Not just in terms of the challenges, but also in terms of the opportunity, because to take it back to the articulation of values, and actually I think the policy framework is robust. The policy framework that we have developed, it is very robust. And when I look look at the objectives that are articulated, say, in the 5-year strategy, they actually stand up well to the current context. It doesn't mean we don't need to reflect now on what are the implementation challenges, what are the implementation priorities, what has shifted in terms of what we need to do and the sequence in which we need to do things. So all of that will be in the mix. But I think it's through continuing dialogue and continuing partnership and continuing to work together in terms of our respective perspectives, and developing our respective understanding, I suppose, of those perspectives. That's how we will work through this. That's how we've worked through it to this point, and that's how we continue to work through it. And certainly from the point of view of the department, we're very committed to that as a continuing, I suppose, ethos in terms of how we engage with the sector and how we engage across government on behalf of the sector, which we have a role in doing. And you know, in terms of ensuring that overall framework is as supportive as it can be and is as enabling and empowering as it can be for organisations in the sector in terms of the very real challenges that they're going to face. And just you know, again, to take it back to the opportunity, like there hasn't been a lot of discussion on social enterprise, for example, other than we've referred to it in the context of the policy framework. But as we look to recovery, you know, and we look to the values that are going to inform recovery, and we look to the sort of values that people that people are identifying as important, we already know that there's huge opportunity in the social enterprise space. There's huge opportunity for social impact organizations. This, like any crisis, it presents a bit of an opportunity for recalibration. You know, the next phase of our economic development, the next phase of our societal development will look different from what went before. And it's important that we're in a position now to inform and shape that. And having the policy framework in place allows us to do that. And certainly, you know, in the social enterprise sector, there is a huge opportunity to grow activity, to support those organizations that are currently just about surviving and sustaining themselves. And we know, you know, from, you've referred to the Charities Regulator survey, we've done a similar survey of the social enterprise sector. So we have a lot of developing data on what's happening in the sector, where we've worked closely with you in trying to make sense of that, in trying to respond to that through the elements of the stability package, but also the other more immediate elements that were put in place to support immediate responses, either through the emergency fund or through support for volunteers and all of those things. But I think there's been a wonderfully positive story to come out of what has been a very dark period for us all, where people have been challenged in so many different ways. And, you know, there were a few references to well-being in the discussion this morning. And I think that is a huge now collective societal challenge. We really have a lot of collective reflection and thinking to do in terms of making sure that we don't lose the opportunity now and that we don't leave anyone behind in the recovery, to borrow that phrase that has been used a number of times this morning.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I really appreciate that. And spontaneously, in place of my own words of thanks, I'm going to read a chat that has just come up to me on the screen. It's from Jackie Horan in Cope and Galway, but it reflects what I would have said, so I will use her words. Because I'm heartened to have someone of Kevin's calibre and vision representing the needs of our sector inside at government level, feeling hopeful. So I will reflect that back to you.
Thank you, Deirdre. Could I just add, because I don't think I paid tribute to everybody in the sector who has been involved in the response, and it is really important. I know it has been said a number of times, but I just wouldn't want to mute my mic without having said that.
I think we'll take the extra 5 minutes if people will allow us. So, and I'll have some words at the very end. So I wouldn't want to cut you off, Kevin, if you're going to say something nice about it.
No, that's okay. That's okay. It's really just simply to say thank you to everybody who has absolutely stepped up to the plate. We know, we recognise that your organisations have been hugely challenged, that the conditions have been extremely difficult, that the demand for services has grown, has exploded in many instances, and that has been a massively challenging period for everybody. And the manner in which people have I suppose, just mobilised to that has been absolutely inspirational. So thank you to everybody involved.
And thank you, Kevin. And again, thanks to your officials. But, you know, I'm not going to start naming them because I'll leave people out and then that wouldn't be right. But you know, there's clearly a lot more to say. There's clearly a lot more to do. As somebody said, governments will change, the community and voluntary and charity and social enterprise, social sector, not-profit sector. We are here. We have been providing, I guess, all of these services, supports and nurturing community spirit for decades, and we will be here for decades to come. But in what way, I think, and in what manner, the relationship and how we can exploit, I guess, the positive benefits and the opportunities that the new insights and self-reflection that we've all had the opportunity to do. So I see you've switched off your video, and I just wanted to say thank you again. And in finishing up and in closing, again, a few minutes late, I just want to remind people that that second part of the Stability Fund, the Social Innovation Fund Innovate Together, closes today. So if you're not here, you're probably finishing off your submission. And it opens again in June and again in August. So I would like to thank all of our contributors. All of these deliberations, reflections, conversations will drive the development of a collective vision paper for our sector's future, which will be developing over the next month. As these sessions go by in the virtual summit, we will be building on the paper that Ivan mentioned that was circulated in advance of today's session. I'd like to thank all the, it's the virtual expo partners who have really supported us in Croke Park in our expo area over many years, and were denied the opportunity. We had a slideshow here, so you would have seen the details and you will have gotten them in the confirmation link in the email. The other sessions in relation to this virtual summit are one around our HR strategy, reward and recognition series. It's about values and putting our values where our people are. And I think that's of crucial importance to some of the issues that are raised. That's the 17th of June. And then the third one is exploring, again, EU values, solidarity and funding on the 18th of June. So, and then the final series on the 24th of June, same time frame as today, will conclude by looking at, I guess, going back out into the societal view and exploring the interface of our sector, our work and society, and how we can all learn a bit more about ourselves as a result of that current situation. So it's kind of like a tying together situation. So mark that day in your diary. I'd like to, in concluding, thank my colleagues in the wheel. I could not work, I completely agree with Paul O'Sullivan, our chairperson, I could not work with a better team of people. Each and every one of them has worked so far above and beyond the call of duty over the last 3 months that it is impossible to describe. You will have all witnessed, though, and benefited from the work of one or many of my colleagues, so you know how extraordinarily speedily they have adapted to support you, our members, and the wider sector in its very difficult hour of need. And as for hosting Zoom meetings, trying to steer the extra 60 or 70 people more, the live streaming on YouTube, as opposed to hitting our hard barrier of 500 registrants here on Zoom, you know, that was a stressful moment in and of itself. I'd like to thank our sign language interpreters too, who have enabled us to run this fully inclusive event. Romeo Callahan and Cormac Leonard, thank you very much. But lastly, thank you to you. Thank you to you all. Thank you to our members who are a source of inspiration for us. Thank you to all of you who work in or support the public benefit work done by Ireland's social sector, charities, community and voluntary organs and social enterprises, non-profits, NGOs. We all share the common endeavour for a better society and a better world, not just here in Ireland and in a global context. The story of our future has yet to be written. The story of our future is being started and has been started here today. Thank you for attending this really unusual summit, Chapter 1. I hope to see you soon. And remember, as I say goodbye, my last words will be to remind you that the work that you and we collectively do and support, it simply has never been more needed. So with that, I'd like to wish you well, stay safe, and enjoy your work, your lives, and I will see you soon. Thank you very much and goodbye.